The radio crackled with desperation as enemy mortars rained down on the pinned American patrol. "We need air support now!" came the urgent call from somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan. But every available aircraft was committed to other missions, and the closest backup was hours away. What the command didn't know was that Captain Maya Rodriguez had already started her engines at Bagram Air Base, about to defy direct orders and prove that sometimes the most unlikely hero is exactly who the mission needs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first light of dawn painted the Hindu Kush mountains in shades of gold and amber as Bagram Air Base stirred to life with its familiar symphony of jet engines, radio chatter, and the steady rhythm of military precision. Captain Maya Rodriguez stood alone on the observation deck of the control tower, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had grown cold while she watched the sun climb over the jagged peaks that surrounded their forward operating base in Afghanistan. At 26, Maya possessed the kind of quiet intensity that made people take notice when she entered a room, though few at Bagram seemed to recognize what they were seeing. Her dark hair was pulled back in the regulation style that somehow managed to look effortlessly professional despite the harsh conditions of desert warfare. Her brown eyes held the sharp focus of someone who had learned to see details that others missed, a skill that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments but had never quite translated into the respect she deserved from her squadron mates. The 445th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron operated from a corner of Bagram that buzzed with constant activity. Mechanics swarmed over F-16C Fighting Falcons, checking weapon systems and replacing components worn down by the punishing demands of close air support missions. Intelligence officers briefed pilots on the latest threat assessments from Taliban and al-Qaeda forces operating in the mountainous regions that made Afghanistan such a challenging theater of operations. Operations planners coordinated with ground forces scattered across dozens of forward operating bases, each requiring different types of air support at different times. Maya had been part of this intricate machine for 8 months, long enough to understand the unspoken hierarchies that governed everything from mission assignments to seating arrangements in the officers' mess. She watched as Lieutenant Colonel Morrison emerged from the squadron headquarters, his confident stride and easy smile immediately drawing attention from the pilots clustered around the mission planning computers. Behind him followed the core group that formed the squadron's unofficial leadership council. Major Tony Castellanos had earned his reputation during urban combat operations in Iraq, where his aggressive flying style and split-second decision-making had saved countless ground troops from insurgent attacks. Captain Derek Walsh brought 4 years of combat experience and a family military tradition that stretched back to Vietnam. Captain Mike Thompson's technical expertise with weapon systems had made him the go-to pilot for complex missions requiring precise ordnance delivery in challenging conditions. These were the pilots who received the high-priority missions when American forces were in contact with enemy fighters. They flew the dangerous reconnaissance flights over Taliban strongholds in the remote valleys where surface-to-air missiles could appear without warning. When VIP transport aircraft needed escort through contested airspace, their names appeared at the top of the assignment roster. Their photographs lined the walls of the squadron ready room alongside commendation certificates and mission success statistics that told the story of American air power in the Afghan theater. They carried themselves with the easy confidence that came from never having their fundamental qualifications questioned. When they walked into briefing rooms, other officers made space and listened carefully to their tactical insights. When they offered opinions during mission planning sessions, their recommendations carried weight that could alter operational parameters. They were the embodiment of what American fighter pilots were supposed to be: aggressive, technically proficient, and absolutely certain of their place in the cockpit of a multi-million-dollar weapons system. Maya knew exactly what to expect from the morning briefing that would begin at 0700 hours. She would take her usual position in the middle row of the briefing room, close enough to hear every detail, but far enough back to avoid drawing attention to herself. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison would outline the day's operations using satellite imagery and intelligence reports that painted a picture of enemy activity across their area of responsibility. The prime missions would flow naturally to the usual suspects, while she would receive assignments for routine patrol flights or training exercises with newly arrived pilots still learning the unique challenges of Afghan operations. The exclusion wasn't based on lack of qualifications. Her performance scores from the Air Force Academy had placed her in the top 5% of her graduating class. Her technical knowledge was comprehensive enough that mechanics often sought her opinions on complex system issues. Her flying skills had been refined through countless hours of additional training that she pursued on her own time, pushing herself and her aircraft to performance levels that impressed even the most demanding instructors. But somehow, when critical missions needed to be assigned, when American lives hung on the balance and tactical success required the very best pilots available, Maya remained effectively invisible. The barriers weren't official anymore. The Air Force had long since opened all combat roles to women and actively promoted diversity in its recruitment campaigns. The obstacles she faced were more subtle, but no less effective for their subtlety. Maya Chen Rodriguez had dreamed of flying military aircraft since she was 8 years old, growing up in El Paso, Texas, and watching F-16s from Holloman Air Force Base streak across the desert sky during training exercises. Her path to the cockpit had been shaped by a unique combination of cultural influences and technical expertise that would later prove invaluable in ways her colleagues never suspected. Her father, Dr. Carlos Rodriguez, was an aeronautical engineer who had immigrated from Mexico and built a successful career designing advanced flight control systems for military aircraft. From him, she inherited both her analytical approach to complex problems and her intuitive understanding of how aircraft systems functioned under stress. Her mother, Dr. Jennifer Chen Rodriguez, was an atmospheric physicist who specialized in weather patterns over mountainous terrain. Growing up in their household meant conversations about lift coefficients and wind shear effects were as common as discussions about homework and weekend plans. This technical foundation gave Maya advantages that her squadron mates rarely recognized. While they struggled with meteorological calculations during mission planning, she instinctively understood how atmospheric conditions would affect weapons accuracy and aircraft performance. While they memorized system specifications from technical manuals, she comprehended the underlying engineering principles that made those numbers meaningful in actual combat situations. While they relied on standard procedures during emergency situations, she could improvise solutions based on her deep understanding of how aircraft systems could be modified to exceed their normal operational parameters. But advantages meant nothing if nobody gave you opportunities to demonstrate them. Despite graduating third in her class from pilot training, despite consistently achieving top scores during combat mission simulations, despite demonstrating the kind of tactical awareness that impressed even veteran instructors, Maya found herself relegated to supporting roles that never showcased her true capabilities. The morning routine that had become her private rebellion began 2 hours before official squadron activities commenced. While her colleagues slept, she studied intelligence reports from across the Afghan theater, memorizing enemy tactics and analyzing successful and failed close air support missions. She had developed an encyclopedic knowledge of Taliban and al-Qaeda operational patterns, from their preferred ambush locations in the Korengal Valley to their typical response times when American forces called for air support. Her personal aircraft, F-16C tail number 910376, had become an extension of her own reflexes through hundreds of hours of unauthorized familiarization flights. She knew exactly how the aircraft would respond to control inputs at various weights and altitudes. She understood the subtle engine vibrations that indicated potential mechanical problems before they appeared on diagnostic displays. She could calculate fuel consumption rates for different mission profiles and plan flight routes that maximize time over target areas while maintaining adequate reserves for unexpected tactical developments. The maintenance crews had noticed her dedication even when the squadron leadership seemed oblivious to it. Master Sergeant Lisa Patterson often arrived at the hangar to find Maya already conducting pre-flight inspections or reviewing maintenance logs with the focused attention of someone whose life depended on understanding every system on the aircraft. "You know this bird better than pilots who've been flying for 10 years, Patterson had observed one morning, watching Maya examine hydraulic connections with the methodical precision of a surgeon. "Most officers just sign the forms and trust us to keep their jets running. You actually understand what makes them work." What the maintenance crews didn't realize was that Maya had been conducting her own advanced combat training program for over a year. Every leave period, she traveled to a civilian airfield in Nevada where her uncle, a former Navy pilot who had flown FA-18s during Desert Storm, helped her practice combat maneuvers that pushed both pilot and aircraft to their operational limits. She had mastered techniques that weren't taught in standard Air Force curriculum: extreme low-altitude flying in mountainous terrain, high-G maneuvering that tested the boundaries of human endurance, and aerial combat tactics that exploited psychological factors as much as technological advantages. Her multicultural background, which some colleagues viewed as a curiosity, had actually given her insights into enemy psychology that proved invaluable in understanding how insurgent fighters operated. She could predict how Taliban commanders would respond to different types of pressure, anticipate their tactical decisions based on cultural factors, and exploit the emotional elements that influenced combat effectiveness under extreme stress. The squadron's attitude toward Maya had crystallized during a briefing 6 weeks into her deployment at Bagram. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison had been discussing the challenges of providing effective close air support in mountainous terrain when he posed a tactical question to the assembled pilots. "What's the most critical factor in keeping our ground forces alive when they're taking fire in difficult terrain?" Hands shot up around the briefing room. Castellanos emphasized superior firepower and rapid response times. Walsh focused on advanced targeting systems and precision munitions. Thompson stressed the importance of coordinating with forward air controllers to ensure accurate target identification. When Maya raised her hand, a subtle pause fell over the room, as if the natural flow of military discussion had been interrupted by an unexpected element. Morrison nodded in her direction with the polite attention typically reserved for junior officers asking basic questions. "Sir, I believe the most critical factor is understanding the psychological state of both friendly and enemy forces," Maya said, her slight accent becoming more pronounced as it always did when she was nervous but determined to make a point. "Combat stress affects decision-making more than any technological advantage. If you can read the panic patterns in enemy movement and anticipate their psychological breaking points, you can position yourself for maximum tactical effect before they realize they're compromised." The silence that followed felt heavier than the mountain air that surrounded their base. Castellanos exchanged a glance with Walsh that communicated volumes without words. Thompson studied his mission planning materials as if they contained classified information about faster-than-light travel. Morrison's expression remained carefully neutral, but his tone carried the patient dismissal of someone correcting a well-meaning but misguided subordinate. "That's an interesting perspective, Rodriguez," he said, with the word interesting carrying about as much enthusiasm as a weather report predicting sandstorms. However, modern close air support is primarily about technological superiority and precise execution of established tactical procedures.
Psychological analysis is better suited to intelligence work than fighter operations. You'd be better served focusing on measurable combat variables rather than theoretical speculation about enemy behavior.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The message was clear without being explicitly stated. Women might be intellectually capable of understanding combat theory, but they lacked the instinctive aggression necessary for actual fighting. They could analyze and theorize, but when bullets started flying and American lives hung in the balance, air combat required a certain ruthless decisiveness that came more naturally to men. This perception followed Maya throughout every aspect of base life. During physical training sessions, her smaller frame became a source of barely concealed skepticism. At 5'5" and 130 pounds, she was routinely outperformed in pure strength exercises by male colleagues who had significant advantages in muscle mass and upper body power. The fact that she could run longer distances, demonstrated superior hand-eye coordination in simulator exercises, and showed better spatial awareness during complex tactical scenarios seemed irrelevant when measured against raw physical presence. Captain Sarah Mitchell, one of only 3 women in the squadron, had warned Maya about these dynamics during her first week at Bagram. "They don't say it directly," Mitchell explained over dinner in the dining facility, "but there's an assumption that we're here to meet diversity requirements, rather than because we earned our wings. Every mistake gets magnified. Every success gets attributed to luck or favorable circumstances. You have to be significantly better just to be considered minimally competent." The assumption extended beyond individual competence to fundamental questions about women's suitability for combat roles in challenging environments. During informal discussions in the pilot's lounge, conversations would shift when Maya entered. Discussions about the physical demands of high-G maneuvering and the psychological stress of close air support missions would cease, replaced by carefully neutral topics like weather patterns and maintenance scheduling. The most frustrating aspect wasn't overt discrimination, which she could have addressed through official channels. It was the subtle, almost unconscious way her male colleagues seemed incapable of visualizing her in actual life-or-death combat scenarios. When they discussed hypothetical engagement situations during tactical planning sessions, they automatically excluded her from the mental imagery. When they planned formation assignments for complex missions, they assigned her to support roles without considering her potential for primary combat responsibilities. Even her demonstrated technical competence worked against her in unexpected ways. Her thorough preparation and attention to detail were interpreted as evidence that she needed to work harder than natural pilots to achieve comparable results. Her psychological insights were dismissed as feminine intuition rather than recognized as sophisticated analysis of human behavior under combat stress. The psychological impact was cumulative and insidious. Each subtle dismissal, each polite redirection, each assumption about her limitations created a growing sense of professional isolation. She began to question not just her colleagues' confidence in her abilities, but her own judgment about her potential as a combat pilot in one of the world's most demanding theaters of operation. The emergency alert pierced through the afternoon calm at Bagram Air Base at 14:32 local time, shattering what had been a routine Tuesday of training flights and maintenance operations. Maya was reviewing weather data in the meteorology section when the base-wide alarm system activated with its distinctive warbling tone that every service member had learned to associate with imminent crisis. She dropped her atmospheric analysis charts and ran toward the Tactical Operations Center, her boots echoing against the concrete floors as fragments of urgent radio traffic filled the corridors. Through the static and overlapping transmissions, she caught words that made her pulse quicken. Troops in contact, heavy casualties, immediate air support required.
The main tactical display in the operations center showed a situation that was rapidly deteriorating from bad to catastrophic. A 12-man Special Forces reconnaissance team operating in the Panjshir Valley had been conducting surveillance on a suspected Taliban command structure when their position was compromised by a larger enemy force than intelligence assessments had predicted. What should have been a covert observation mission had become a desperate fight for survival against overwhelming numbers. Colonel James Patterson stood at the center of the controlled chaos, his weathered face grim as he coordinated response efforts with multiple command centers across Afghanistan and back to Central Command in Florida. The digital map displayed red icons representing enemy positions that seemed to multiply with each intelligence update, surrounding a small blue dot that marked the embattled American team. "Sir, we've confirmed at least 60 Taliban with heavy weapons," reported Major Lisa Chang from the intelligence section, her voice tight with the urgency of someone delivering news that kept getting worse. "They've got the SF team pinned down in a ravine with limited cover. Initial reports indicate 2 wounded, 1 critical. They're requesting immediate close air support to break contact and move to the extraction point." The distance from Bagram to the contact site was significant, but well within the operational range of F-16 Fighting Falcons. Under normal circumstances, the mission would have been straightforward. Deploy aircraft to provide covering fire while the ground team moved to a safer location where helicopters could extract them. But these were not normal circumstances, and the Tactical Situation Board told a story of resources stretched beyond their breaking point. Patterson nodded grimly and turned to Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, who was already reviewing available assets on his tablet computer. "Brad, I need your fastest response team airborne in 20 minutes. This is a hot LZ with confirmed enemy anti-aircraft capabilities. No room for mistakes." Morrison began mentally cataloging his available pilots, and Maya watched as a devastating realization began to dawn on his face. The squadron's most experienced combat pilots were scattered across other commitments that couldn't be easily recalled. Major Castellanos and Captain Walsh were in Pakistan for a joint training exercise with Pakistani Air Force units. Captain Thompson was on emergency leave following a family crisis back in the States. The mathematical reality was brutal and unforgiving. "Sir," Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering news that no commander wanted to hear. "We've got a critical pilot shortage situation. Our primary close air support specialists are unavailable for immediate deployment. Miller and Jackson are at Kandahar providing overwatch for a convoy operation that can't be interrupted. Stevens and Martinez are on crew rest following a 14-hour mission yesterday that exceeded normal flight time limitations." The implications hung in the air like smoke from a burning aircraft. The mission required immediate response from pilots with combat experience in close air support operations, but the available personnel were either junior officers fresh from training or pilots who specialized in different types of missions. Maya found herself analyzing the tactical display with the same intensity she brought to every military problem, her mind automatically calculating distances, fuel requirements, and engagement parameters. The enemy force had positioned itself with tactical sophistication that suggested more than typical Taliban capabilities. They had established overlapping fields of fire that prevented the Special Forces team from moving to more defensible positions. Their weapons placement indicated knowledge of American tactical doctrine and countermeasures that went beyond what local insurgent groups typically possessed. Most critically, they had positioned anti-aircraft systems that would threaten any conventional close air support approach. The terrain favored the attackers in almost every way. The narrow ravine where the American team had taken shelter provided protection from direct fire, but created a killing field for indirect weapons like mortars and rocket-propelled grenades. The surrounding ridgelines offered perfect positioning for enemy fighters while limiting options for air support aircraft.
The entire tactical situation seemed designed to neutralize the technological advantages that American forces typically relied upon. Patterson consulted multiple displays simultaneously, weighing options that all carried unacceptable risks. "What's our timeline for reinforcements from other bases?" "Minimum 6 hours from Incirlik, sir," came the response from the communications section. "Weather over the Arabian Sea is creating delays for carrier-based aircraft. The closest Army aviation assets are committed to operations in Helmand Province." 6 hours was an eternity for soldiers under direct enemy fire. Maya had studied enough combat reports to know that isolated ground units rarely survived sustained attacks from large enemy forces for more than 2 hours. The mathematics of ammunition consumption, casualty rates, and enemy tactical advantages were as unforgiving as the laws of physics governing aircraft performance. The radio crackled with transmissions from the embattled ground team, and the voice that came through the speakers belonged to Master Sergeant David Cooper, whom Maya recognized from joint training exercises conducted earlier in her deployment. His typically calm demeanor had been replaced by the clipped urgency of someone fighting for his life and the lives of his teammates.
Lieutenant Colonel Morrison shook his head with the expression of someone explaining fundamental concepts to a well-meaning but misguided subordinate. "Rodriguez, even if you could somehow reach the target area without getting shot down, which is highly questionable, this mission requires the kind of tactical expertise that comes only from extensive combat operations. The margin for error is essentially zero." Captain Mitchell, standing near the intelligence displays, added her voice to the chorus of concern. "Maya, I understand your desire to help, but close air support in contested territory requires perfect coordination between aircraft and ground forces. One mistake could result in friendly fire casualties." The objections continued around the operations center, as other personnel voiced their skepticism about her proposal. Her knowledge of the terrain was dismissed as theoretical understanding, irrelevant to actual combat conditions. Her tactical analysis was characterized as classroom theory without practical application. Her months of specialized preparation were unknown to her colleagues, making her offer appear to emerge from dangerous overconfidence rather than systematic training. "Rodriguez, I appreciate your willingness to help," Colonel Patterson said, his tone carrying the patronizing patience typically reserved for junior officers who didn't understand the complexities of combat operations. "But close air support isn't about enthusiasm or academic preparation. It's about instantaneous tactical decisions under life-threatening stress, and that requires combat experience you simply don't possess." Major Chang joined the discussion with technical concerns that carried additional weight due to her intelligence background. "Sir, even our most experienced pilots would find this mission challenging. The fuel calculations are marginal and the terrain is extremely difficult, and the enemy has demonstrated anti-aircraft capabilities that could engage our aircraft before they reach the target area." Maya listened to each objection while mentally reviewing every aspect of the tactical situation her colleagues were describing. Their concerns were based on standard approaches to close air support missions, but standard approaches were exactly what the enemy would be prepared to counter. What the situation demanded was the kind of unconventional thinking that her unauthorized training had specifically prepared her for. The radio interrupted their discussion with another transmission from the embattled ground team. Master Sergeant Cooper's voice carried increased urgency as the tactical situation continued to deteriorate. "Thunderbird Base, enemy forces are moving closer to our position. We're taking accurate sniper fire and coordinated assault from multiple directions. We need air support immediately or you're going to need to send body bags instead of extraction helicopters." The stark reality of Cooper's transmission hung over the operations center like a cloud of toxic smoke. American soldiers were going to die unless someone took action within the next few minutes. All the standard procedures, all the careful risk assessments, all the institutional protocols that normally governed military operations had collided with the simple fact that qualified personnel weren't available when they were needed most. Patterson stared at the tactical display showing the deteriorating situation while calculating risks that all led to unacceptable outcomes. The silence stretched until broken by another urgent radio transmission from the contact site. this one carrying news that made everyone's decision more critical. Thunderbird Base, this is Ranger 7-1. Enemy forces have breached our outer perimeter. We're taking casualties and running low on ammunition. Request immediate air support or emergency extraction authorization. Emergency extraction meant abandoning the reconnaissance mission and potentially compromising intelligence-gathering operations across the entire region. It also meant accepting that enemy forces had successfully defeated American operations through tactical superiority, a precedent that would affect future mission planning throughout the Afghan theater. Maya realized that time was running out for both the trapped ground forces and her opportunity to prove that institutional assumptions about pilot qualifications were preventing the kind of innovative tactical responses that could save American lives.
Maya's proposal hung in the air of the operations center like smoke from an exploded ordnance, creating a tension that seemed to affect even the electronic equipment humming around them. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds before Colonel Patterson's response came with the swift certainty of someone accustomed to making decisions that could affect American lives across multiple theaters of operation. "Absolutely not, Rodriguez. You're not qualified for this type of mission, and I won't authorize what amounts to a suicide run disguised as tactical innovation." His words carried the finality of military authority, but Maya had expected this reaction. What she hadn't anticipated was the level of institutional resistance that followed, as if her offer to help had somehow violated fundamental assumptions about proper military hierarchy and appropriate conduct during crisis situations. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stepped closer to the tactical display, his expression mixing genuine concern with barely concealed frustration. "Rodriguez, you're completely out of line suggesting this. Close air support in contested mountainous terrain isn't an opportunity for career advancement or proving theoretical capabilities. American lives depend on experienced combat pilots making split-second decisions based on established tactical doctrine, not experimental approaches from someone with zero combat flight hours." The criticism that followed seemed to emerge from every corner of the operations center, as if her suggestion had opened the floodgates of skepticism that had been building for months. Captain Stevens, monitoring communications from the contact site, shook his head with the expression of someone witnessing dangerous delusion rather than tactical innovation. "With respect, sir, she's talking about flying solo against a prepared enemy force with anti-aircraft capabilities in some of the most challenging terrain in Afghanistan. That's not a mission for someone whose combat experience consists of training scenarios and simulation exercises. It's a guaranteed way to lose another aircraft and pilot while accomplishing nothing except creating additional casualties." Major Chang joined the discussion with technical objections that carried particular weight due to her intelligence background and comprehensive knowledge of enemy capabilities in the region. "Colonel, our assessment indicates this Taliban force has access to advanced surface-to-air missiles, possibly including systems provided by external support networks. Even our most experienced pilots would find this mission extremely challenging. The terrain creates natural choke points where aircraft become vulnerable to coordinated anti-aircraft fire." Maya listened to each objection while her mind continued analyzing the tactical situation displayed on the center's main screen. Their concerns were based on conventional approaches to close air support missions, assumptions about how aircraft should approach target areas and engage enemy forces. But conventional thinking was exactly what had created the resource shortage crisis they were facing, and conventional responses were precisely what the enemy would be prepared to counter. "Sir, knowing that challenging her superiors during a crisis could end her military career, but unable to watch American soldiers die because of institutional limitations, the conventional approach isn't available because we don't have qualified pilots immediately ready for deployment. My approach adapts to the specific tactical realities we're facing rather than relying on standard procedures that assume resources we don't currently possess." Colonel Patterson's expression hardened with the look of someone whose patience had reached its absolute limits.
Rodriguez, this isn't a time for theoretical discussions about tactical innovation. We're dealing with American lives under direct enemy fire, and that requires proven expertise, not academic speculation about alternative approaches.
The dismissal felt like a physical blow, but Maya pressed forward, knowing that the ground team's situation was deteriorating with each passing minute. Sir, I understand the risks involved, but I've studied this exact type of scenario extensively. The enemy positioning follows predictable patterns based on previous Taliban operations in mountainous terrain. They're prepared for standard American responses, but not for approaches that exploit their tactical assumptions. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's response carried the tone of someone explaining basic military concepts to a well-meaning but dangerously naive subordinate. Rodriguez, you're talking about psychological analysis and theoretical tactical planning. Combat operations require instantaneous decision-making under extreme stress. Enemy forces don't follow textbook patterns when American aircraft start dropping ordnance on their positions. Captain Mitchell stepped forward with her own concerns, and Maya realized that even her fellow female pilot was questioning the wisdom of her proposal. Maya, I know you want to help, but close air support requires perfect coordination between aircraft and ground forces. The margin for error is essentially zero when you're delivering precision weapons in close proximity to friendly forces. One navigation mistake or timing error could result in friendly fire casualties that would be worse than the current situation. The objections continued flowing from multiple sources within the operations center. Her comprehensive knowledge of regional terrain was characterized as theoretical understanding without practical application. Her tactical analysis was dismissed as classroom theory irrelevant to actual combat conditions. Her months of unauthorized advanced training remained unknown to her colleagues, making her proposal appear to emerge from dangerous overconfidence rather than systematic preparation. Staff Sergeant Williams from the meteorology section added weather-related concerns that seemed to provide additional justification for rejecting her offer. Ma'am, current atmospheric conditions include significant wind shear at altitude and unpredictable downdrafts in the mountain valleys. Even experienced pilots have difficulty maintaining weapons accuracy under these conditions. Maya realized that her colleagues were describing meteorological challenges that her specialized training had specifically prepared her to handle, but revealing the extent of her unauthorized preparation would only create additional problems regarding why she had been conducting advanced combat training without official authorization or supervision. Master Sergeant Reynolds from Aircraft Maintenance joined the discussion with mechanical concerns about pushing aircraft beyond normal operational parameters. Colonel, this mission profile would require extended flight time at high stress levels. We're talking about maximum fuel consumption, high-G maneuvering, and weapons delivery under combat conditions that could exceed normal aircraft specifications. Each technical objection was valid when considered within the framework of standard operating procedures, but Maya understood that standard procedures had been designed for situations where adequate numbers of qualified personnel were available for immediate deployment. When those fundamental assumptions proved false, the entire system of tactical response began breaking down like a mathematical equation with missing variables. The radio interrupted their debate with another transmission from Master Sergeant Cooper, and his voice carried the increased desperation of someone watching his tactical situation deteriorate beyond recovery. Thunderbird Base, enemy forces have established fire superiority over our position. We've taken additional casualties and are critically low on ammunition. Request immediate extraction or air support. We cannot hold this position much longer. Colonel Patterson grabbed the handset and keyed the transmission with visible frustration at the impossible choices he was facing. Ranger 7-1, we're working on your air support request. Can you give us an updated assessment of enemy positions and your current status? Cooper's response came between the sounds of automatic weapons fire and what sounded like mortars impacting near their defensive position. Thunderbird, enemy forces are approximately 150 meters from our position and closing from multiple directions. We have 2 urgent surgical casualties and are down to about 10 minutes of effective ammunition. Whatever you're going to do, it needs to happen now.
10 minutes of ammunition meant that the Special Forces team would be overrun within a quarter hour unless something changed dramatically in their favor. The mathematical reality was brutal and unforgiving. No amount of careful planning or risk assessment would matter if they ran out of options before help could arrive. Maya found herself staring at the tactical display while calculating flight times, weapons parameters, and approach vectors with the same analytical precision she had applied to every challenge throughout her military career. The enemy force was positioned exactly where tactical doctrine predicted they would be, concentrated in locations that maximized their advantages against standard American air support approaches. But their positioning also created vulnerabilities that unconventional tactics could exploit. Her analysis of atmospheric conditions revealed opportunities that standard meteorological briefings wouldn't identify. Most critically, the enemy's psychological state created weaknesses that could be leveraged through careful timing and misdirection techniques she had been perfecting through months of unauthorized training. "Colonel," she said quietly, knowing that further argument would be counterproductive but unable to remain silent while American soldiers died unnecessarily. "Those people are counting on us to attempt everything tactically feasible, not just everything institutionally comfortable." Patterson's expression shifted to the cold authority of someone whose decisions were being questioned during a crisis situation. "Rodriguez, you're dismissed from this operations center. Report to your assigned duties and allow qualified personnel to handle the situation according to established procedures." The dismissal was absolute and final, delivered with military authority that made further argument impossible without risking court-martial for insubordination during combat operations. Maya saluted with the precision that had been drilled into her since her first day at the Air Force Academy, but her mind was already calculating possibilities that her superiors had rejected. As she turned to leave the operations center, she heard Lieutenant Colonel Morrison addressing Colonel Patterson with the kind of tactical assessment that confirmed her worst fears about institutional thinking. "Sir, our best option is to coordinate with Special Operations Command for emergency extraction while we wait for additional air assets to become available. It's not optimal, but it minimizes further casualties." Emergency extraction meant abandoning the reconnaissance mission that had cost 2 American soldiers their lives and potentially compromising intelligence operations across the entire regional theater. It also meant accepting that enemy forces had successfully defeated American tactical capabilities through superior positioning and timing, creating a precedent that would affect military operations throughout Afghanistan. Maya walked steadily toward the exit, maintaining the professional composure expected of Air Force officers while internally reviewing every detail of the tactical situation her superiors had deemed unsolvable. Her colleagues were following established procedures that prioritized institutional risk management over tactical innovation. But those procedures had been designed for situations where adequate resources were available for conventional responses. The corridor outside the operations center buzzed with activity as personnel moved between duty stations, coordinating various aspects of base operations that continued regardless of individual crises. Maya nodded to colleagues she passed, her expression carefully neutral while her mind raced through calculations that had nothing to do with accepting institutional limitations or regulatory constraints. She reached her quarters and closed the door, then stood motionless for several seconds while processing the full implications of what she had witnessed in the operations center. American soldiers were going to die because qualified personnel weren't available for immediate deployment, and unqualified personnel weren't trusted with missions they might actually be capable of completing successfully.
The military bureaucracy that prioritized established experience over demonstrated capability was about to cost lives, because institutional thinking prevented recognition that exceptional circumstances might require exceptional responses. Maya realized that she faced a choice between accepting the system's limitations or taking personal responsibility for attempting what others deemed impossible. Her flight gear hung in its regulation position, cleaned and maintained to standards that exceeded MOML requirements. Her personal equipment bag contained items that most pilots didn't carry: detailed topographical maps marked with her own tactical annotations, atmospheric analysis tools inherited from her mother, and tactical reference materials based on combat footage analysis that went far beyond standard intelligence briefings.
The most critical element was her intimate familiarity with F-16C tail number 910376, which had become an extension of her own reflexes through hundreds of hours of unauthorized preparation. She knew exactly how the aircraft would perform under the stress conditions required for the mission everyone else considered suicidal. And more importantly, she understood how to modify its operational parameters to achieve performance characteristics that exceeded official specifications. Outside her window, she could see aircraft preparations continuing for missions that would arrive too late to affect the outcome for Master Sergeant Cooper and his team. Ground crews moved with practiced efficiency, loading weapons and performing pre-flight checks according to procedures that assumed adequate time for proper mission planning and coordination. But time was the one resource they didn't possess. The Special Forces team had perhaps 5 minutes of effective resistance remaining before their position would be overrun by enemy forces who had demonstrated tactical sophistication beyond typical Taliban capabilities. Those 5 minutes represented the difference between successful extraction and body recovery operations. Maya sat on her bunk and began making mental calculations that had nothing to do with following orders or maintaining her military career. The timing would have to be perfect, exploiting the chaos of emergency operations to mask unauthorized actions that would normally be detected immediately. The risks were enormous, both personally and professionally, but the alternative was accepting that American soldiers would die because institutional thinking prevented tactical innovation. She stood up and began moving with the purposeful efficiency of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. Her unauthorized training had prepared her for exactly this type of scenario, where conventional responses were inadequate and unconventional approaches offered the only hope for mission success. The question was no longer whether she possessed the technical capability to attempt the mission her superiors had rejected. The question was whether she possessed the moral courage to act on that capability when institutional authority had explicitly forbidden such action. As she reached for her flight helmet, Maya realized that some decisions transcended military hierarchy and regulatory constraints, especially when American lives hung in the balance. The sound of jet engines starting echoed across Bagram Air Base as other pilots began missions that would arrive too late to matter. But Maya understood that being too late was only relevant if you followed conventional approaches to problems that demanded unconventional solutions. Maya stood in her quarters for exactly 30 seconds after closing the door, her mind shifting from institutional compliance to tactical execution with the clarity that comes when moral imperatives override regulatory constraints. The sounds of normal base operations continued outside her window. Vehicles moving between buildings, personnel conducting routine duties, the distant hum of generators maintaining electrical power across the sprawling facility. But for 12 American soldiers trapped in a valley 300 miles away, normal operations had ceased to matter. She moved to her wall locker with deliberate precision, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was contemplating. Her flight suit hung exactly where regulations required, pressed and maintained to standards that reflected her dedication to military excellence. But as she began changing from her duty uniform, Maya understood that she was crossing a threshold from which there could be no return to the comfortable predictability of following orders and accepting institutional limitations. The unauthorized training she had conducted for over a year had prepared her for this moment in ways that went far beyond technical flying skills. Her uncle Magnus had emphasized that exceptional circumstances required exceptional responses, and that the most important decisions military personnel ever made often occurred outside the framework of official authorization or regulatory approval. Real combat situations rarely match training scenarios, he had told her during one of their weekend sessions in Nevada. When the textbook doesn't cover your situation, you have to write new chapters based on your understanding of physics, psychology, and moral responsibility. The question isn't whether you're following proper procedures. The question is whether you're doing everything possible to accomplish the mission and protect American lives. Maya secured her flight gear with the methodical attention to detail that had become second nature through countless hours of preparation. Her helmet contained communication equipment that would allow her to coordinate with the ground forces, assuming she could reach the target area before their ammunition ran out and their position was overrun. Her survival vest held emergency equipment that could prove essential if her aircraft was damaged by enemy fire and she was forced to eject over hostile territory. The personal items in her equipment bag represented months of specialized preparation that her colleagues never suspected. Detailed topographical maps marked with her own tactical annotations based on studying satellite imagery and intelligence reports. Weather analysis instruments inherited from her meteorologist mother that could provide atmospheric data not available through standard meteorological briefings. Emergency medical supplies selected specifically for treating combat injuries in mountainous terrain. Most critically, she had memorized every technical specification of F-16C tail number 910376 through unauthorized familiarization that went far beyond normal pilot requirements. She knew exactly how the aircraft would respond to control inputs under various stress conditions. She understood the subtle engine variations that indicated optimal performance parameters. She could calculate fuel consumption rates for different mission profiles and modify flight characteristics to exceed official operational limitations. The timing of her departure would require exploiting the natural chaos that emergency operations created across the base. Personnel would be focused on coordinating official responses, creating communication complexity that might delay immediate detection of unauthorized aircraft movement. Ground crews would be preparing multiple aircraft for a potential deployment, masking the significance of one additional plane being moved to flight-ready status. Maya slipped out of her quarters through the maintenance corridor that connected to the flight line, avoiding main pathways where she might encounter colleagues who would question her presence near operational aircraft. The route took her through sections of the base she had explored during off-duty hours, learning every access point and security checkpoint that might affect unauthorized movement during crisis situations. The aircraft hangar buzzed with preparation activity as maintenance personnel performed pre-flight checks and loaded weapons on planes designated for official response missions. Her F-16 sat in its assigned position, fully fueled and armed from routine maintenance procedures completed that morning. The aircraft was technically ready for immediate deployment, lacking only pilot authorization and official mission parameters. Chief Master Sergeant Patricia Kim noticed her approach but didn't question her presence, assuming Maya was conducting her usual detailed inspection of aircraft systems. "Evening checks, Captain?" she asked, her tone carrying the routine professionalism of someone accustomed to pilots who took personal responsibility for their equipment. "Just making sure she's ready if needed," Maya replied, knowing that the aircraft would indeed be needed, just not in the way Kim anticipated. She began her standard pre-flight inspection with the same thorough attention to detail that had characterized every aspect of her military service, but now each check carried the weight of preparing for unauthorized combat operations. The control surfaces moved through their full range of motion. The weapon systems showed green lights across all status indicators. The navigation equipment had been updated with the latest satellite positioning data. Engine parameters fell within optimal ranges for maximum performance. Every system that could affect mission success had been verified and double-checked according to procedures that exceeded normal requirements. As Maya completed her inspection, she realized that months of preparation had led to this single moment of decision. She could return to her quarters, accept the institutional limitations that prevented her from attempting the mission, and watch from the sidelines as American soldiers died because qualified personnel weren't available for immediate deployment. Or she could take personal responsibility for attempting what others deemed impossible, knowing that failure would end her military career and success would still result in court-martial proceedings for unauthorized use of military aircraft. The choice crystallized with startling clarity. Master Sergeant Cooper and his team were counting on American military capabilities to provide the air support they had been promised when they accepted the reconnaissance mission. The fact that institutional bureaucracy prevented delivery of that support didn't change their tactical situation or their right to expect everything possible would be attempted on their behalf. Maya climbed into the cockpit of 910376 with movements made automatic by countless hours of practice. Her hands moved across control systems with fluid efficiency, each switch and procedure executed with the precision of someone who had memorized every possible configuration. The aircraft responded to her inputs like an extension of her own nervous system, systems coming online in perfect sequence. Engine startup was accomplished using rapid deployment techniques her uncle had taught her for emergency situations where speed mattered more than noise discipline. The F-16's Pratt & Whitney engine spooled up to idle power with the smooth acceleration that never failed to remind her why she had chosen to become a fighter pilot despite every institutional barrier placed in her path. The radio came alive with communications from the tower as soon as her engine reached operational parameters. Aircraft 910376, you are not cleared for engine start. Shut down immediately and report to base operations for explanation of unauthorized aircraft activation. Instead of responding to the tower's demands, Maya switched to the tactical frequency being used by the trapped Special Forces team. She needed to establish communication with Master Sergeant Cooper before base security could prevent her departure, creating a tactical situation where stopping her would directly impact American soldiers under fire. Ranger 71, this is Thunder 18, requesting immediate situation report and coordinates for close air support mission. She transmitted, her voice carrying the steady professionalism that months of training had prepared her to maintain under extreme pressure. Cooper's response came immediately, his tone mixing disbelief with desperate hope. Thunder 18, we were told no air support was available. What's your estimated time to target area? Ranger 71, I'm launching immediately. Estimate 15 minutes to your position. Transmit current enemy locations and friendly positions for target coordination. Maya released the brakes and began rolling toward the active runway, knowing that once she committed to takeoff, there would be no possibility of changing her mind or returning to the safety of following orders. The tower's communications became increasingly urgent as controllers realized that she intended to depart despite explicit orders to remain on the ground. Aircraft 910376, you are not authorized for departure. Return to parking immediately or face immediate court-martial proceedings for theft of military aircraft. Maya increased power to military thrust and lifted off into the clear Afghan afternoon, her aircraft climbing toward the mountains where American soldiers were fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. Behind her, Bagram Air Base erupted in controlled chaos as personnel realized that a pilot they had deemed unqualified for combat operations had just commandeered a fighter aircraft to attempt a mission they had rejected as impossible. Her radio crackled with increasingly frantic communications from base operations. Colonel Patterson's voice carried a mixture of anger and genuine concern that cut through the static interference from the mountainous terrain she was approaching. Rodriguez, you are in direct violation of orders and unauthorized use of military equipment. Return to base immediately or face court-martial for theft of government property and endangering military operations. But Maya had already switched her primary radio to the frequency Cooper's team was using, cutting off the demands for her return while maintaining communication with the soldiers who needed her support. Ranger 71, this is Thunder 18. I'm airborne en route to your position. Give me a detailed briefing on enemy positions and the tactical situation. Cooper's voice carried the controlled urgency of someone coordinating what might be his last chance for survival. Thunder 18, enemy forces have established overlapping fields of fire from positions north and east of our location. We count approximately 60 fighters with heavy weapons, including machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. They've been coordinating their assault for the past hour and are preparing for the final overrun of our position. The tactical picture Cooper described matched Maya's analysis of Taliban operational patterns in mountainous terrain. The enemy force was positioned exactly where doctrine predicted, concentrated in locations that maximized their advantages against ground forces while providing defensive coverage against conventional air support approaches. But their positioning also created vulnerabilities that unconventional tactics could exploit. Ranger 71, understand 60 enemy fighters in prepared positions. What's your ammunition status and casualty situation? Maya asked while her F-16 streaked across the Afghan landscape toward the contact area. Thunder 18, we're down to approximately 5 minutes of effective ammunition. We have 3 wounded,
two requiring immediate medical evacuation. Enemy forces are within 100 meters of our position and preparing for the final assault. 5 minutes of ammunition meant that Cooper's team would be overrun before conventional air support could arrive from other bases. Maya realized that she represented their only hope for survival, and that realization brought with it a sense of purpose that transcended institutional authority or regulatory compliance. The mountains ahead rose like jagged teeth against the afternoon sky, their peaks creating the challenging terrain that made close air support operations so dangerous in Afghanistan. Maya began her descent to low altitude, using terrain masking techniques that would prevent early detection by enemy air defense systems. The F-16 hugged the contours of the landscape, its advanced flight control systems automatically adjusting to maintain optimal clearance above ridgelines and valley floors. Her navigation was precise, guided by landmarks she had studied obsessively, and weather patterns her specialized training had taught her to interpret. The atmospheric conditions were exactly as her meteorological analysis had predicted, creating opportunities for weapons delivery that wouldn't be available under standard operational parameters. At 10 miles from the target area, Maya established visual contact with the combat zone. Smoke rose from multiple impact points in the narrow valley where the Special Forces team had established their defensive positions. Enemy muzzle flashes were clearly visible from positions that surrounded the Americans like a closing fist. Ranger 7-1, this is Thunder 1-8. I have visual contact with your position. Mark your location with smoke and prepare for immediate close air support. Take whatever cover you can find and stay low until I give you the all clear. Cooper's response carried the first note of genuine hope she had heard since establishing communication. Thunder 1-8, marking our position with yellow smoke. Enemy positions are clearly visible from your altitude. We're ready to receive your support. Maya armed her weapon systems and began the final approach that would either vindicate months of unauthorized preparation or add her name to the casualty list of pilots who had attempted missions beyond their capabilities. The next few minutes would determine whether exceptional circumstances truly justified exceptional responses, or whether institutional skepticism about her qualifications had been correct all along. The F-16 screamed through the mountain valley at 480 knots, its engine noise echoing off the rocky walls like thunder, announcing the arrival of American air power where none was supposed to exist. Maya pulled the aircraft into a steep climb, gaining altitude for her first tactical assessment of the battlefield spread below her. What she saw confirmed her worst fears about the tactical situation Master Sergeant Cooper and his team were facing. The Taliban force had positioned itself with sophisticated understanding of American close air support doctrine. Heavy weapons teams occupied elevated positions that provided overlapping fields of fire while remaining concealed from standard attack approaches. Their defensive layout suggested military training that went beyond typical insurgent capabilities, possibly indicating involvement of foreign advisors or former Afghan army personnel who understood NATO tactical procedures. The Special Forces team's position was even more precarious than radio communications had indicated. They had established a defensive perimeter among a cluster of boulders that provided some protection from direct fire, but the surrounding terrain offered multiple avenues of approach for enemy assault forces. Yellow smoke marked their location exactly as Cooper had promised, but Maya could see enemy fighters moving closer to the American positions with each passing minute.
Ranger 7-1, this is Thunder 1-8. I have visual confirmation of your position and enemy forces. Beginning immediate close air support runs. Stay down and mark any changes in enemy positioning. Maya's voice carried steady professionalism, despite the complexity of what she was attempting to accomplish with a single aircraft against a prepared enemy force. Cooper's response came between bursts of automatic weapons fire. Thunder 1-8, enemy forces are approximately 75 meters from our position and closing fast. We're taking accurate fire from multiple directions. Whatever you're going to do, it needs to happen now. Maya rolled in the F-16 into her first attack run, diving toward the valley floor at an angle that would bring her weapons to bear on the largest concentration of enemy fighters. But as she began her approach, her tactical analysis revealed why conventional air support would have struggled with this mission even under optimal circumstances. The enemy positions were distributed among rocky outcroppings that provided natural camouflage and protection from aerial attack. More critically, they were positioned close enough to the American forces that precision weapons delivery would require split-second timing and perfect accuracy to avoid friendly fire casualties. The margin for error was essentially non-existent. Her first target was a heavy machine gun position that had been providing sustained fire against Cooper's team from an elevated ridge approximately 150 meters north of the American perimeter. Maya lined up her approach vector using the terrain masking techniques her uncle had taught her, approaching from an angle that would minimize her exposure to other enemy positions while maximizing the effectiveness of her cannon fire. The 20mm Vulcan cannon roared to life with its distinctive buzzsaw sound, sending a stream of depleted uranium projectiles into the enemy position at 6,000 rounds per minute. The rocky outcropping where the machine gun had been emplaced disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris, eliminating the weapon and its crew in a matter of seconds. But Maya's attack run had revealed her presence to the entire enemy force, and their response was immediate and coordinated. Tracer fire reached up toward her aircraft from multiple positions, creating streams of light that crisscrossed the valley like deadly fireworks. Her aircraft shuddered as several rounds found their target, but the F-16's robust construction absorbed the damage without affecting flight characteristics. Thunder 1-8, outstanding work. Cooper's voice carried new energy as the suppression of the machine gun position allowed his team to shift to more defensible positions. Enemy forces are repositioning in response to your attack. They're trying to establish new firing positions on the eastern ridge. Maya pulled up from her first attack run and immediately began positioning for her second pass, but the tactical situation had become exponentially more complex. The enemy force was now aware of her presence and actively attempting to counter her attacks with coordinated anti-aircraft fire. Their positioning suggested they had planned for the possibility of air support and were executing countermeasures that could prove effective against a single aircraft. Maya's analysis of the enemy response patterns revealed both threats and opportunities that conventional tactical doctrine wouldn't have anticipated. The Taliban fighters were reacting with discipline that indicated experienced leadership, but their countermeasures were based on expectations of multiple aircraft operating in coordination. They hadn't adapted their defensive posture for engagement with a single fighter attacking from unconventional angles.
She dove toward the valley from the southwest, approaching the battlefield from an angle that no pilot operating under normal tactical doctrine would have attempted. The approach required flying dangerously close to mountainous terrain while maintaining precise control over weapons delivery. But it allowed her to engage enemy positions before their air defense systems could respond effectively. Her second cannon run eliminated a rocket-propelled grenade team that had been preparing to assault Cooper's position directly. The 20mm rounds tore through their position with devastating effectiveness, scattering equipment and forcing other enemy fighters to seek better cover among the rocky terrain. But Maya's fuel consumption was higher than optimal due to the high-stress maneuvering required to avoid enemy fire. Her calculations indicated that she had perhaps 10 minutes of combat time remaining before fuel considerations would force her to break off the engagement and return to base. 10 minutes to eliminate or neutralize 60 enemy fighters with sophisticated defensive capabilities. Ranger 7-1, give me updated enemy positions. I need to maximize the effectiveness of the remaining attack runs. Maya climbed to gain better observation of the battlefield, while her tactical computer calculated optimal attack vectors for her remaining ordnance. Cooper's response revealed how dramatically the tactical situation had changed in their favor. Thunder 1-8, enemy forces are breaking contact on the northern positions. Estimate 20 fighters remaining in defensive positions to our east and south. They're trying to establish coordinated fire positions, but your attacks have disrupted their command structure. Maya smiled grimly as she positioned for her third attack run. The psychological warfare component of her strategy was working exactly as planned. Enemy fighters who had been confident in their tactical superiority were now experiencing the kind of confusion and fear that affected decision-making under extreme stress. Her third attack focused on the remaining concentration of enemy fighters who were attempting to maintain their assault on Cooper's position. But instead of a direct attack, Maya used the terrain to create the impression that multiple aircraft were engaging from different directions. She approached from the east, delivered a brief cannon burst, then disappeared behind the mountains, only to reappear from the south seconds later. The tactic created maximum psychological pressure while conserving ammunition for the most critical targets. Enemy fighters began firing at shadows and maneuvering to counter threats that existed only in their imaginations. Their disciplined defensive posture began breaking down as individual fighters made decisions based on fear rather than tactical coordination. Thunder 1-8, enemy forces are withdrawing from their positions. Cooper's voice carried amazement as he watched Taliban fighters abandoning their attack and beginning to retreat toward higher ground. They're breaking contact and moving away from our perimeter. But Maya knew that the mission wasn't complete until Cooper's team could reach a safe extraction point. The enemy withdrawal might be temporary, designed to regroup and resume their attack once they believed American air support had departed. Her remaining fuel would allow for perhaps 2 more attack runs before she would be forced to return to Bagram, leaving the Special Forces team vulnerable to renewed assault. Ranger 7-1, are you able to move toward the extraction point? I can provide cover for your movement, but my time on station is limited. Maya positioned her aircraft to observe the enemy withdrawal while maintaining readiness to engage any forces that might threaten Cooper's movement. Cooper's response carried the first note of genuine optimism she had heard since establishing communication. Thunder 1-8, we're preparing to move now. We've got 2 litter cases, but we can reach the primary extraction point if you can keep the bad guys away from us for another 15 minutes. 15 minutes was longer than Maya's fuel calculations would normally allow, but her unauthorized training taught her fuel consumption management techniques that could extend her operational time beyond official specifications. More importantly, she understood that Cooper and his team represented exactly the kind of mission that justified pushing aircraft and pilot to their absolute limits. Ranger 7-1, I'll maintain overwatch during your movement. Start moving and keep me informed of any enemy contact. Maya began a tactical patrol pattern that would allow her to respond immediately to any threat against the withdrawing Americans while maintaining readiness to engage any forces that might threaten Cooper's movement. The movement toward the extraction point revealed the full extent of what her unauthorized intervention had accomplished. Enemy forces that had been positioned to overrun the American position were now scattered and demoralized, their tactical coherence destroyed by attacks they hadn't been prepared to counter. The Taliban fighters who remained in the area were focused on their own withdrawal rather than continuing their assault on Cooper's team. But Maya's fuel gauges were approaching levels that would normally require immediate return to base. Her calculations indicated that she had perhaps 5 more minutes of combat capability before aviation fuel considerations would override tactical requirements. 5 minutes to ensure that 12 American soldiers reached safety after she had defied direct orders to attempt their rescue.
Thunder 1-8, this is Ranger 7-1. We're taking some harassing fire, but nothing we can't handle. We should reach the extraction point in 10 minutes. Outstanding work up there. You saved our lives today. Maya pulled her aircraft into one final attack run, targeting the sources of harassing fire that were slowing Cooper's movement towards safety. Her cannon eliminated the remaining threats with precision that reflected months of preparation for exactly this type of mission. As she climbed away from the valley floor, she realized that she had accomplished what institutional authority had deemed impossible.
single aircraft close air support against a prepared enemy force in mountainous terrain. The F-16 turned toward Bagram Air Base with fuel gauges showing levels that would require careful management during the return flight. But Maya understood that fuel calculations were secondary to the knowledge that 12 American soldiers were alive because someone had been willing to attempt what others considered impossible. Behind her, yellow smoke rose from the extraction point where helicopters would soon arrive to retrieve Cooper and his team. Ahead lay the certainty of court-martial proceedings and the end of her military career. But Maya had proven that exceptional circumstances could justify exceptional responses, and that institutional limitations couldn't override moral obligations to protect American lives. The radio crackled with transmissions from Bagram operations demanding her immediate return and explanation for unauthorized military actions. But Maya had already demonstrated that sometimes the most important military decisions occurred outside the framework of official authorization, when soldiers under fire needed support that regulations couldn't provide. The F-16 touched down at Bagram Air Base with fuel gauges showing levels that would have been impossible under standard operational calculations, a testament to the consumption management techniques Maya had perfected through unauthorized training that no one in command authority knew existed. As the aircraft rolled to a stop, she could see the reception committee waiting for her, military police vehicles, senior officers, and the kind of formal assembly that indicated her military career was about to end in spectacular and highly visible fashion. Colonel Patterson stood at the center of the group, his expression carrying the cold authority of someone prepared to deliver consequences that had been promised and would now be fulfilled without exception. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison flanked him, along with Captain Stevens and Major Chang, all wearing the carefully neutral expressions of officers witnessing the conclusion of disciplinary actions they had predicted from the beginning. Maya shut down her aircraft's systems with the same methodical precision she had applied to every aspect of the unauthorized mission, knowing that 910376 might be the last military aircraft she would ever pilot. The engine wound down with the familiar whine that marked the end of combat operations, but this time the sound carried finality that went beyond completing a single flight. As she climbed out of the cockpit, Maya realized that the base communication systems had been monitoring her radio traffic with Cooper's team throughout the engagement. Every tactical decision, every weapons delivery, every moment of the unauthorized mission had been recorded and would become evidence in the court-martial proceedings that would determine her future in the United States Air Force. Captain Rodriguez, you are under arrest for unauthorized use of military aircraft, violation of direct orders, and endangering military operations. The military police officer's words carried the formal precision of someone reading charges that had been prepared before she landed. You have the right to remain silent and request legal counsel. But before the arrest procedures could be completed, Colonel Patterson's radio crackled with an incoming transmission that caused him to hold up his hand for silence. The voice that came through the speaker belonged to Master Sergeant Cooper, and his words carried the kind of authority that comes from surviving what everyone had predicted would be a fatal encounter.
The impact of Cooper's transmission rippled through the assembled officers like shockwaves from an explosion. Patterson's expression shifted from administrative authority to tactical assessment as he processed the implications of what had been accomplished through unauthorized action. Morrison stared at Maya with the look of someone recalculating assumptions that had seemed mathematically certain only hours earlier. Captain Stevens broke the silence with a question that everyone present was thinking, but no one had been willing to ask. "Sir, are we confirming that a single F-16 successfully completed close air support against 60 enemy fighters in mountainous terrain?" Cooper keyed his radio to respond to Cooper directly. "Ranger 7-1, confirm your previous transmission regarding mission outcome and pilot performance assessment." Cooper's response came without hesitation, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had witnessed performance that exceeded every expectation of what individual capability could accomplish under impossible circumstances. Thunderbird Base confirms mission success through outstanding pilot performance. Thunder 1-8 engaged superior enemy forces using tactics that neutralized their defensive advantages. Textbook precision weapons delivery in challenging terrain with zero friendly fire incidents. Exceptional airmanship throughout the engagement. Major Chang stepped forward with her intelligence assessment, her tone reflecting professional analysis rather than personal opinion about Maya's violation of orders. Colonel, preliminary debriefing indicates that Captain Rodriguez's tactical approach exploited vulnerabilities in enemy positioning that conventional close air support doctrine wouldn't have identified. Her psychological analysis of enemy behavior patterns proved accurate under combat conditions. The evaluation continued as reports arrived from multiple sources confirming the success of the unauthorized mission. Intelligence intercepts revealed that the Taliban force had suffered significant casualties and had withdrawn from the area entirely, abandoning their planned operations against other American units operating in the region. Medical reports confirmed that Cooper's team had reached the extraction point without additional casualties, allowing immediate evacuation of wounded personnel who might not have survived prolonged combat operations. Most significantly, tactical analysis revealed that Maya's approach had accomplished in 20 minutes what conventional close air support doctrine would have required multiple aircraft and extensive coordination to achieve. Her single aircraft engagement had demonstrated tactical innovations that exceeded the capabilities of standard operational procedures under similar circumstances. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison approached Maya with an expression that mixed professional assessment with personal reassessment of assumptions he had held about her capabilities. Rodriguez, your tactical radio communications during the engagement suggest preparation and training that goes far beyond your official qualifications. How did you develop the expertise demonstrated during this mission? Maya realized that the moment had come to reveal the unauthorized training program she had been conducting for over a year, knowing that disclosure would create additional military justice complications, but understanding that honesty about her preparation was essential to any evaluation of what had been accomplished. Sir, I've been conducting advanced combat training with a civilian instructor who is a former Air Force pilot. Every weekend for the past 14 months, I've practiced close air support techniques, high-stress maneuvering, and tactical scenarios that pushed both pilot and aircraft beyond normal operational parameters. The revelation created a new category of complications for the officers assembled around her aircraft. Maya had not only violated orders by taking unauthorized military action, but had also been conducting training that exceeded her security clearance and official authorization. The combination represented multiple violations of military regulations that typically result in immediate discharge from service.
But Colonel Patterson was now analyzing the situation through a different framework than pure regulatory compliance. The success of Maya's unauthorized mission had demonstrated capabilities that the Air Force needed, particularly in theaters where resource limitations prevented conventional responses to tactical emergencies. Her individual performance had exceeded what multiple aircraft operating under standard doctrine typically achieved. Rodriguez, your unauthorized actions violated direct orders and military regulations, Patterson said, his tone carrying the authority of someone delivering judgment that had been carefully considered. However, the tactical success you achieved under impossible circumstances suggests capabilities that warrant further evaluation rather than immediate punishment. The assembled officers exchanged glances that reflected the complexity of evaluating unauthorized actions that had produced exceptional results. Military discipline required consequences for violation of orders, but tactical effectiveness demanded recognition of performance that exceeded institutional expectations under combat conditions. Captain Mitchell stepped forward from where she had been observing the proceedings, her expression reflecting both concern for Maya's situation and professional assessment of what the unauthorized mission had demonstrated. Colonel, Captain Rodriguez's performance suggests that our institutional assumptions about pilot readiness may need reassessment. Her tactical innovations could have applications for future operations in similar circumstances. Major Chang nodded in agreement, her intelligence background providing context for evaluating the broader implications of Maya's success. Sir,
The enemy force she engaged had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded our assessment of typical Taliban operations. Her ability to counter their sophisticated defensive measures suggests tactical understanding that goes beyond standard training curricula. The evaluation process continued as additional reports arrived confirming various aspects of the unauthorized mission's success. Weather reports verified that atmospheric conditions had been challenging for precision weapons delivery, making Maya's accuracy even more remarkable. Maintenance inspections of her aircraft revealed that she had pushed the F-16 to performance levels that approached its structural limits while maintaining complete control throughout high-stress maneuvering. Most importantly, tactical analysis confirmed that her approach had exploited psychological and technical vulnerabilities that conventional doctrine wouldn't have identified. Her success had demonstrated that individual capability could overcome institutional limitations when properly applied to tactical situations that standard procedures couldn't address effectively. "Rodriguez," Colonel Patterson said, "after consulting with his staff officers, your unauthorized actions created a situation that requires both disciplinary and tactical evaluation. You violated direct orders and military regulations in ways that normally result in court-martial and discharge from service." Maya stood at attention, prepared to accept whatever consequences her actions had earned, knowing that she had accomplished exactly what she had set out to achieve regardless of personal cost. 12 American soldiers were alive because someone had been willing to attempt what institutional authority had deemed impossible. However, Patterson continued, "the tactical success you achieved under combat conditions demonstrates capabilities that the Air Force needs to understand and potentially integrate into our operational doctrine. Your performance will be evaluated by specialists who can assess whether your innovations have broader applications for air support operations." Lieutenant Colonel Morrison added his own assessment, his tone reflecting professional recognition of performance that had exceeded his expectations. "Rodriguez, your tactical radio procedures and weapons delivery during the engagement were flawless. Whatever training you conducted on your own time produced results that rival our most experienced combat pilots." The recognition felt surreal after months of institutional dismissal and exclusion from meaningful missions. Maya realized that a single unauthorized flight had accomplished more for her professional standing than years of following regulations and accepting limitations that others had defined for her capabilities.
But the broader implications extended beyond personal vindication to questions about how the military identified and developed exceptional talent. Maya's unauthorized training had produced capabilities that exceeded standard curricula, suggesting that institutional approaches to pilot development might be limiting rather than maximizing individual potential. Captain Stevens approached with tactical questions that reflected genuine professional curiosity about techniques that had proven effective under combat conditions. "Rodriguez, your approach to terrain masking and psychological warfare against enemy air defenses showed innovation that wasn't covered in any training I've seen. Where did those tactics come from?" Maya's response revealed the depth of preparation that her colleagues had never suspected. "Sir, I studied combat footage from successful close air support missions and analyzed the tactical patterns that produced optimal results. I developed approaches that exploited enemy assumptions about American air support doctrine while using atmospheric conditions to maximize weapons accuracy." The technical discussion that followed demonstrated that Maya's unauthorized training had produced expertise that exceeded official requirements in multiple areas critical to combat effectiveness. Her understanding of enemy psychology, her ability to exploit terrain and weather conditions, and her weapons delivery precision had all been developed through individual initiative that went far beyond institutional expectations. As the evaluation continued, Maya realized that her unauthorized mission had initiated a broader reassessment of how the Air Force identified and utilized exceptional talent. Her success had demonstrated that institutional barriers might be preventing optimal deployment of capabilities that could save American lives and accomplish tactical objectives that standard approaches couldn't achieve.
The radio crackled with another transmission from Master Sergeant Cooper, whose voice carried the authority of someone whose professional assessment carried weight throughout the military hierarchy. Thunderbird Base requests confirmation that Thunder 1-8 will receive appropriate recognition for performance that exceeded every expectation of what individual pilot capability could accomplish under impossible circumstances. Colonel Patterson keyed his response with the tone of someone making decisions that would affect policy beyond the immediate situation. Ranger 7-1, Thunder 1-8's performance will receive full evaluation and appropriate recognition. Her tactical innovations may have applications for future operations throughout the theater. Maya stood surrounded by officers whose assessment of her capabilities had been fundamentally altered by 20 minutes of unauthorized combat operations. The institutional barriers that had limited her opportunities for months had been demolished by performance that demonstrated exceptional capability under conditions that tested the limits of both pilot and aircraft. The consequences of her unauthorized actions remained to be determined, but the tactical success had established a new framework for evaluating her potential contributions to Air Force operations. Maya had proven that exceptional circumstances could justify exceptional responses, and that individual capability could overcome institutional limitations when properly applied to tactical challenges that demanded innovative solutions. 6 months after Maya Rodriguez defied direct orders to save 12 American lives in the mountains of Afghanistan, she stood before a joint congressional committee in Washington, D.C., wearing dress blues adorned with ribbons that told a story no one could have predicted when she first arrived at Bagram Air Base. The Distinguished Flying Cross gleamed on her chest alongside the Air Medal with Valor, decorations that represented official recognition of performance that had fundamentally altered how the United States Air Force approached close air support operations in challenging environments.
The committee room buzzed with the controlled energy of a hearing that would influence military policy for years to come. Senators and representatives from both parties had requested detailed briefings about the tactical innovations that had emerged from what initially appeared to be a case of military insubordination. What they discovered was a story that challenged fundamental assumptions about how exceptional talent should be identified, developed, and deployed within the American military structure. Senator Patricia Williams, chairwoman of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Air-Land Forces, opened the hearing with questions that reflected months of investigation into the broader implications of Maya's unauthorized mission. Captain Rodriguez, your actions on that day in Afghanistan violated military regulations, yet they also demonstrated capabilities that our standard training programs hadn't developed. How do we reconcile the need for military discipline with the recognition that innovative thinking saved American lives? Maya's response reflected the confidence that had grown from months of recognition rather than dismissal, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose expertise was now sought rather than questioned. Senator, military discipline and tactical innovation aren't mutually exclusive. The key is creating institutional frameworks that can identify exceptional circumstances where standard procedures may be inadequate, and developing personnel who can respond effectively when conventional approaches aren't sufficient. The hearing represented the culmination of changes that had begun the moment Colonel Patterson decided that Maya's performance warranted evaluation rather than immediate punishment. Within weeks of the unauthorized mission, Air Force leadership had initiated comprehensive reviews of pilot development programs, tactical training curricula, and the institutional barriers that might be preventing optimal utilization of available talent. The results had been transformational in ways that extended far beyond individual recognition. Maya's tactical innovations had been analyzed by specialists at the Air Force Weapons School, integrated into advanced combat training programs, and disseminated to pilot training facilities throughout the military education system. Her psychological approach to enemy engagement had been studied by behavioral analysts and incorporated into intelligence training for combat operations. Most significantly, the unauthorized training program she had conducted with her uncle Magnus had become the foundation for a new advanced combat preparation initiative that allowed exceptional pilots to develop capabilities beyond standard curricula. The program operated under official supervision but encouraged exactly the kind of individual initiative that had produced Maya's tactical innovations. General Rebecca Anderson, Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, had testified earlier in the hearing about the institutional changes that Maya's performance had initiated.
Captain Rodriguez's success demonstrated that our traditional approaches to identifying and developing exceptional talent may have been unnecessarily restrictive. We've implemented new programs that allow outstanding personnel to pursue advanced training that exceeds standard requirements, under proper supervision and with appropriate safety protocols. The changes extended throughout the military hierarchy in ways that affected thousands of service members who had previously been constrained by institutional assumptions about their potential contributions. Women pilots throughout the Air Force reported increased opportunities for challenging missions and recognition that their capabilities might exceed traditional expectations. The barriers weren't completely eliminated, but Maya's success had created precedents that made exclusion more difficult to justify. Captain Sarah Mitchell, Maya's former colleague who had warned her about the difficulties women faced in combat aviation, now served as director of the new Advanced Combat Training Initiative that had grown from Maya's unauthorized preparation program. Her testimony to the Congressional Committee reflected how institutional culture could change when exceptional performance challenged fundamental assumptions. The program Captain Rodriguez developed through individual initiative has become a model for how we can identify and develop exceptional talent throughout our pilot training systems, Mitchell explained to the committee. We've discovered that many personnel possess capabilities that exceed their official qualifications, but they need opportunities to develop and demonstrate those capabilities under appropriate supervision. The psychological research that had emerged from analyzing Maya's tactical approach had applications that extended beyond aviation to ground combat, special operations, and intelligence work. Her understanding of how to exploit enemy behavioral patterns under stress had been studied by military psychologists and incorporated into training programs that taught personnel to recognize and leverage psychological factors in combat situations.
Dr. James Patterson, a military behavioral analyst who had studied Maya's tactical innovations, testified about the broader implications of her approach. Captain Rodriguez demonstrated that understanding human psychology can be as important as technological superiority in combat situations. Her ability to predict and exploit enemy decision-making patterns represents a significant advancement in how we think about tactical planning and execution. The technological aspects of Maya's performance had been equally influential in changing Air Force operational doctrine. Her fuel management techniques had been analyzed and incorporated into pilot training programs, extending the operational range and effectiveness of fighter aircraft in situations where conventional calculations suggested missions weren't feasible. Her weapons delivery precision under challenging conditions had become a benchmark for training standards throughout combat aviation programs. Master Sergeant David Cooper, whose life had been saved by Maya's unauthorized intervention, provided testimony that carried the moral authority of someone who had witnessed exceptional performance under impossible circumstances. His words reflected the perspective of ground forces who depended on air support that institutional limitations might prevent from being delivered when needed most. Captain Rodriguez proved that exceptional circumstances require exceptional responses, Cooper told the committee, his voice carrying the conviction of someone whose survival had depended on individual courage and capability. She demonstrated that sometimes the most important military decisions happen when someone is willing to take personal responsibility for doing what's right, even when it conflicts with official procedures. The legal aspects of Maya's case had been resolved through a complex process that balanced military justice requirements with recognition of exceptional performance under combat conditions. Rather than court-martial proceedings, she had been subjected to administrative review that acknowledged both the violation of orders and the tactical success that had resulted from her unauthorized actions. The resolution had created new precedents for evaluating unauthorized actions that produced exceptional results under combat conditions. Military justice experts had developed frameworks for assessing whether violations of orders were justified by circumstances that standard procedures couldn't address effectively.
Maya's case had become a model for how the military could maintain discipline while recognizing that exceptional situations might require individual initiative beyond normal authorization levels. Lieutenant General Michael Stevens, who had overseen the review process, explained the legal implications to the Congressional Committee. Captain Rodriguez's case demonstrated that our military justice system needed to be flexible enough to recognize when unauthorized actions serve legitimate military objectives. We've developed new evaluation criteria that balance the need for discipline with recognition that exceptional circumstances may justify individual initiative beyond normal authorization levels. The international implications of Maya's tactical innovations had attracted attention from Allied military services throughout NATO. British, Canadian, and Australian air forces had requested training exchanges to study her approach to close air support in challenging terrain. Her methods had been incorporated into joint training exercises and had influenced tactical doctrine development across multiple Allied nations. The educational impact had been equally significant. Maya's story had become a case study at military academies, staff colleges, and professional development programs throughout the American military education system. Her experience illustrated principles about leadership, individual initiative, and moral courage that transcended the specific tactical details of her unauthorized mission. Colonel Patricia Hayes, Commandant of the Air Force Academy, testified about how Maya's story had been integrated into leadership training programs. Captain Rodriguez's experience teaches future officers that exceptional circumstances may require them to take personal responsibility for decisions that go beyond normal authorization levels. She demonstrates that moral courage sometimes means accepting personal risk to protect American lives. The technological development that had emerged from studying Maya's performance had led to new aircraft modifications and training systems designed to maximize individual pilot capabilities. Her approach to terrain masking and precision weapons delivery had influenced the design of new flight control systems and targeting technologies that were being incorporated into next-generation fighter aircraft.
The personnel development implications had been transformational throughout the Air Force and had influenced policy in other military services. Maya's success had demonstrated that exceptional talent could emerge from unexpected sources and that institutional barriers might be preventing optimal utilization of available capabilities. New programs had been implemented to identify and develop personnel whose potential exceeded their current assignments or official qualifications. As the congressional hearing concluded, Senator Williams posed a final question that addressed the broader implications of Maya's story for American military effectiveness. Captain Rodriguez, what lessons should military leadership take from your experience about balancing institutional discipline with the need for innovative thinking and individual initiative? Maya's response reflected wisdom gained through months of recognition and responsibility that had followed her unauthorized mission. Senator, military effectiveness depends on developing personnel who can think independently while operating within institutional frameworks that support rather than constrain exceptional performance. The goal should be creating systems that identify and develop exceptional talent rather than limiting personnel to predetermined roles based on traditional assumptions. The hearing concluded with acknowledgments from committee members that Maya's experience had initiated changes throughout American military education, training, and operational doctrine that would affect thousands of service members for years to come. Her unauthorized mission had demonstrated that individual capability could exceed institutional expectations when properly developed and applied to circumstances that demanded innovative responses. As Maya left the Capitol building, she reflected on the journey that had taken her from institutional dismissal to congressional testimony about military policy reform. The unauthorized flight that had saved 12 American lives had also saved her own military career while creating opportunities for countless others who possessed exceptional capabilities that traditional approaches might not have recognized or developed. The F-16s flying overhead in formation reminded her that American air power would continue to evolve through the contributions of individuals who were willing to push beyond conventional limitations when circumstances demanded exceptional responses. Maya Rodriguez had proven that when they called for air support, sometimes the most unlikely hero could appear like thunder from heaven, bringing exactly the capabilities the mission required. The legacy of her unauthorized mission would continue influencing American military operations long after the specific tactical details had been superseded by new technologies and changing strategic requirements. Maya had demonstrated that exceptional circumstances could justify exceptional responses, and that individual courage and capability could overcome institutional limitations when American lives hung in the balance. Her story had become proof that sometimes the most important military decisions weren't made in headquarters or committee rooms, but in cockpits over hostile territory by individuals who were willing to risk everything to protect the soldiers who counted on American military capabilities to bring them home safely.